Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Frontier Literary Festival, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Ken Follett, the international best-selling author, with us tonight in conversation with Jenny Crwys-Williams, which I'm sure you all know as a very well-known broadcaster and also author herself in South Africa. Yes, Jenny, I saw today, I didn't realize you'd written 11 books yourself, which is a fantastic achievement, but not as many as Ken's. I must say I was blown away when I read the figure that Ken has 178 million copies of 36 books that he's written that have sold worldwide in 33 languages. So that is quite hard to beat. And Ken's been described as one of the best-selling authors of the last 50 years. And we're launching his book, Never, which is a standalone this evening. And Ken, congratulations. I saw it was an instant bestseller on the New York Times bestselling list. And I saw a few comments on Twitter. Some people say it's even better than Pillars of the Earth. And others say it is so riveting, they read all 800 pages in one day, which is really quite a feat. So thank you so much for joining us, both of you. And thank you to all our viewers and FLF members that are joining us tonight. And Jenny, I will hand over to you now. Thank you so much. And we'll take questions after 45 minutes of the discussion. But we'll remind you of that. But please feel free to post your questions or any comments throughout this event, and we'll happily show them on screen. Thank you so much, the two of you. Over to you, Jenny.
Well, thank you. While I rearrange my hair, I don't know what's happened. Ken Follett, it's lovely to be speaking to you. And I mean, Ingeborg's introduction, some of the comments about Never are a cautionary tale of global catastrophe. I think that was the Washington Post. And you know, all of them are, I mean, people have looked at it quite seriously, I think. And so have you been thrilled by the response?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And the main thing that makes me happy is that people have said that once they started reading it, they couldn't stop, which is what I'm always trying to do. But also it's very interesting that my imagination of something that could happen has convinced people that it might happen, and they want to discuss you know, is it true that this could really happen? And if so, is there anything we can do about it? And that's quite nice too. People actually discussing the possibility of the danger. The danger in Never is the outbreak of a third world war. And people are discussing that possibility seriously now. So, which I think is a good thing, because we should be aware of what could happen.
But you see, in Never, and of course I've been thinking about it because, I mean, it is an extraordinary read. And just in case there's somebody there who hasn't seen the cover, this is what it looks like. And I mean, it's 800 pages. And you can't put it down because you're so curious as to where this is leading, how the people are just going to mesh towards the end of the book. I mean, it really is an incredible read. But I was just thinking, World War I, Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, but really nobody really cared except the other royals, I don't think. But it was all the alliances, you know, so somebody was in bed with somebody else, etc. And it was the same with World War II, because Britain came into World War II because it had signed a treaty with Poland. And there was Germany marching into Poland. And that did it. I mean, that started, really, the Second World War. Otherwise, it could have been limited, I think.
Well, yes. And this is the terrible danger in international politics. As you say, the assassination in Sarajevo in July 1914, the assassination of the emperor's nephew, was in itself not a terrible event. And in Never, the spark that lights the fuse is the killing of an American soldier in Chad by a terrorist with a Chinese rifle. And you might say, and people in the book say, okay, this is very, very sad, killing of a decent young American soldier, but it's not the end of the world. It's not. But then what happens in my story and in 1914 was that there was a response to this, and a response to the response. And the crisis got worse and worse as different nations responded to what the previous person had done. That's exactly what happens in Never. And that's the danger. And I wanted to make it very realistic. So in Never, there are no crazy people who are leaders. There's no lunatic. There's no Donald Trump in charge of a major country. All the leaders in my story are sensible people, but nevertheless, they're pushed by the pressure of events into something that they never wanted.
Well, you know, I know the last time we spoke, I was saying to you, there's an element of me feeling that it was almost predictable what was going to happen in the book. I mean, you were looking forward. You couldn't have predicted when you started, I don't think, the direction that this book was going to take, because it just accumulates. I kept thinking, do you have charts on the walls? Do you have sticky notes? I mean, I know authors who've got sticky notes forever and bits of string linking characters and things, but you've got 5 major stories going on at any one time. I mean, that is hectic.
Yes, from that point of view, it was a challenging book to write because, of course, international politics is complex, and in 1914 it was complex. The alliance, for example, there was a crucial alliance between France and Russia, and yet that was affected by an assassination that took place in Serbia, with Russia and France had very little to do with Serbia. Britain had very little to do with any of it, but we ended up joining in the fight. And so that you're absolutely right about the complexity. Of course, if I've done my job right, then the reader will not be bewildered by it. The reader will say, oh, I understand, this is complicated, but I understand it, because I really don't believe in confusing the reader. I think that's the worst thing that a writer can do. So I think the reader will get it immediately, but it is a complex situation. And for me to make it readily understandable, I have to really have a grasp on it. You're quite right about that. And that was a challenge. But, you know, my system is that I write an outline of the story before I actually start writing the story. And the outline says what happens in every chapter. And I always have, I have 3 screens now, and the middle screen is what I'm writing. The screen on my left is the outline that I've prepared, and the screen on the right is a table of the characters saying who they are, how old they are, and what they look like. And so that's what helps me keep track of all this, is having those 3 screens with those 3 key pieces of information. And not that it's easy, but, you know, if it was easy, anybody could do it.
Yes, well, I mean, you've done it once or twice. And I mean, can we go back a little bit? I want to talk about thrillers, and I want to talk about Ken Follett and thrillers, because your first real, I mean, you've been writing, you wrote 5 books until in 1978, you wrote The Eye of the Needle, and which wasn't its original title anyway. And that just catapulted you. I think it was almost immediately 10 million copies sold. Am I right with that?
It's not immediately, but in the long run, yes, 10 million, yeah, so far.
But I mean, but when did you know that this book, which might have been your 5th or your 6th one, was it? At what stage did you know? Was it the reviews? What was it, Ken?
I knew while I was writing it that it was a lot better than anything I'd done before, miles better. And you're quite right. I'd written several novels. In fact, I'd done 10 books before this, so this was my 11th try at writing a bestseller. But I was married then to my first wife, Mary, and she remembers me sitting at the typewriter, because it was a typewriter then, not a computer, sitting at the typewriter and saying to her, this is really good. This is really good. So I had a sense, you know, a strong sense that I was writing something better than I had done before. And in fact, I quit my job because I was absolutely sure that this book would pay the mortgage for 2 years. So I thought, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to give it 2 years. The mortgage will be paid for 2 years, and then we'll see. And of course, it did very well, and it paid more than the mortgage. So, that was so before anybody read any of it, I was pretty convinced. You know, you can be wrong about something like that, and maybe it was foolhardy of me to actually quit my job before anybody else had read it, because I could have been just kidding myself. But as it turned out, I wasn't. And I had that sense. And sometimes you really have that sense with something that you're writing,
Yes.
because it's got momentum. And I wrote Eye of the Needle in 1977. I was owed some leave from my job. I was working as an editor at a publisher's. I took 3 weeks because I had some accumulated leave. And, I wrote most of Eye of the Needle in that 3 weeks. Boy, I wish I could write that fast now.
Well, for you, it was a short book, under 500 pages, only just. But when I think of Never, that's 800 pages sort of thing. So you like to spread yourself around. But I mean, I think also because almost immediately the movie offers came in, and you had Donald Sutherland, for goodness sake, and what was the name of the gorgeous girl?
Kate Nelligan.
Wasn't she wonderful?
She was beautiful and a really good actress, and a Canadian actress who could do an English accent effortlessly.
Well, she was fantastic, and
Yeah.
I can remember seeing the movie and thinking, God, this is just amazing. But you forsook thrillers pretty soon after that for much longer epic stories. But the thriller, and I mean, it's masterly because it really is tense, and I can't guess what you're going to do next. And I mean, that's exactly what you want, and how you're going to pull the characters together as well, because you've got somebody living on the shores of Lake Chad, you've got somebody living in Chad, you've got someone in Washington who happens to be the first American president, and it wasn't Kamala, and she was, I think, shorter than Kamala. And I mean, how to bring all those characters together, I think, is also part of the intrigue of Never.
Yes, I think so. And I like stories like that. I like stories where there are people in different parts of the world, but their destinies are interwoven. I find that, as a reader, I find that very satisfying. And I like to write that sort of thing. And of course, it's challenging, but it's worth it. In everything that's challenging turns out to be worth it in the end, I find. This writing The Pillars of the Earth was terribly difficult. I'd never done anything like that before. And, I worked on it for 2 years and I only had about 180 pages, and I panicked and I thought, I'm going to be writing this book for the rest of my life. And so I started to work Saturdays and Sundays. And for the last year of writing The Pillars of the Earth, a bit more than a year, I was working 7 days a week. But actually, the challenge, the difficulty was also inspiring. And and Never was similar in that way. It was something that I'd never really tried before, and it was challenging. But there is something about a challenge for an author that is also motivating and inspiring. And my experience has been, if you try something different that seems a bit difficult, it does you good, because it makes you reach for something that you haven't done before.
And I think it's also feeling nervous. I mean, I was very often nervous before I went on air. And I just think it makes you work harder, because you are nervous and you've got to deliver, and and then before you know where you are, you're in the midst of it, and it's absolutely lovely. But the thriller writing is different to your epic writing, is it not?
Well, it is. It's not as different as you might think, but yes, of course, it is different in some ways. And writing in the present is different from writing a historical novel. In some ways, writing in the present is easier because you don't have to check so much. You can say in the present, you can say somebody was eating sausages and that's okay. If you say that in a novel set in the 16th century, you've got to check whether sausages have been invented in the 16th century. So there's always that. There's also a difference in that never is really driven by suspense. There's danger right from the start. There's danger, and the danger mounts slowly but surely all the way through the story. And that's really the driver of the story. These different people in their different cities who will eventually all be involved in the same drama. They all sense some danger, and they're all fighting against some danger. Now, in a historical novel, it isn't always quite like that. It's not quite so intense in a historical novel, although there are other rewards reading a historical novel. So I suppose that I've written, in the beginning of my career, I wrote Eye of the Needle and other thrillers that were relatively short. And then I did the long historical novels. Now Never is a kind of mixture of the two, in that it's driven by suspense all the way through, but it is also quite long. And which means that you've got, for even more pages, you've got to make sure that nobody's bored. Nobody's thinking, the worst thing in the world is if the reader starts thinking, how many more pages of this have I got to read? I mean, that's disaster. That's that absolutely terrible. That happens to me occasionally when I'm reading a book, and I guess it might happen to you too, Jenny, that you think you're reading the book and you think, how many more pages have I got to go through?
Yes.
And that's what, and in a long book, that's the thing that you absolutely have to avoid. So you've got to keep the story moving, not just for 100,000 words, but for 300,000 words. And that requires more and more imagination, more and more developments in the story. And that's the challenge. But as I say, basically, I feel challenges are good for a creative artist.
Definitely. And you also, I think, in terms of dragging the listeners or the readers along with you, the book is divided into Defcon. It starts with Defcon 5, and then it goes on to, whatever level it does go on to. So it's very clearly demarcated, because, Defcon 5 means, be aware of what's going on in the world. And maybe for people who don't know about Defcon, you'd just like to explain what it is, specifically for the United States?
Yes, it's a code used by the American military, and Defcon is short for defense condition. And Defcon 5 is normal. And then Defcon 4 is heightened awareness. And it goes all the way up to Defcon 1, which means nuclear war is imminent or has already begun. And so it's like a traffic light system. And I read about this, and it's a genuine thing that the military use, but it's very graphic, isn't it? It's very striking. And I thought of the chapters and the phases in Never, and I thought, well, actually that applies, because each of, we begin with Defcon 5. There is no real danger right at the beginning, and then there starts to be an element of danger, and it increases. And really the code used by the American military was very appropriate to the stages in my book. So rather than have part 1, part 2, part 3, I had Defcon 5, Defcon 4, Defcon 3, and all the way up. And it was just to sort of underline the escalation that's going on in the story.
And I suppose as well, because I was sharing with you the fact that I read the last 3 or 4 chapters in bed this morning. I mean, I reread them. And I mean, they're very, very tense. And I can understand why the reviewers are all looking at this book and asking how prescient you actually were. But really, the great, I suppose, friction points in the world today, Ken, I mean, it is the United States of America and it is China. And then lurking in the background, there's North Korea. So it's like this toxic mix, and there are treaties between this one and that one, etc., etc. And then it expands from there. So I understand why those are the main places. What I don't understand is when we get deep into China, are the conversations that go on in China, because it's not like reading a page and picking it up and understanding it. There are meanings behind the meanings behind the meanings. You were writing in double speak for quite a considerable part of this book. That must have been one, fun, but also a big challenge.
Well, yes, it is, because Chinese government obviously isn't open, and it's a secretive society. So I found myself constantly, somebody would say something in a meeting at Zhongnan High, which is the center of the Chinese government, a sort of a big park with palaces and lakes, which is the center of the Chinese government. And there would be a meeting going on, and somebody would say something, and my character would think to himself, what that means is, and it was obviously different from what he was saying, but there was always had to be an interpretation. And that's what you get with that kind of secretive society. Of course, you get it in all societies, but I guess at least in some societies, there is a commitment to openness, a commitment which may not be achieved all the time. People may not meet the standard, but at least there is an aspiration to openness. And then in other societies, there's no aspiration to it at all, and everybody has to navigate the codes, but in a way that I think that adds to the book, because my character then, my Chinese character is called Chiang Kai, and he's head of the Foreign Intelligence Department of the Chinese Secret Service. He's very smart, and he's a bit of a progressive, and his enemies are all the old hardline communists, the diehard communists. And so all the time he is reading everything that's said as something that is against him and against the progressive view, or in favor of him and against the communist, very hawkish view. And that adds a little bit to the tension. He's not only trying to negotiate with or defeat these guys, he's also trying to understand them and make sure he knows. It's like a chess game. You move the bishop, and
Yes.
At first it doesn't look as if it's made any difference to the knight on the other side. And then 2 moves later, you realize that moving that bishop was devastating. I'm not a very good chess player, by the way, but I'm good enough to know how bad I am. And that is the kind of thing that happens in chess. There's a move and you think, now, what did that mean? What is my opponent trying to do by making that move? And I'm much better at writing a story in which I know the answers in advance.
Let's talk a little bit about some of your characters. And can I just remind everybody that we're very, very willing, Ken is very willing to answer your questions. So if you want to get them going, please do, as we continue with this conversation, because there's lots to talk to him about. Let's talk about some of your characters. I'm sure that you must have had your own favorite. I think one of my favorites was Keir, who lived once upon a time on the shores of Lake Chad, which now, because of climate change, has retreated by a good kilometre, and in no time at all, there's going to be no water there at all. And she's got to find a new life for herself, and quick. I thought she was very appealing. You've got Tamara, who's a spy with the US Embassy in Chad. You've got, I wrote them all down because they were so interesting. You've got the president, who is sort of happily married, but she's got a stressful job and she's got a teenager. Oh my word. Can you imagine anything more stressful than a teenager in the White House? I mean, I think that must have been quite hard. Of your characters, who stood out for you?
Well, you mentioned Keir, who's the Arab woman who at the beginning of the story is living on the shore of Lake Chad and realizes that there is no future for her there and she's not going to be able to feed her child. She's a widow. And so she decides to make the very dangerous journey to Europe. And she's interesting because in some ways she's like the women in my stories. She's brave and she's smart and she's gorgeous, but she's also, because she has lived all her life in this village in a one-room house, she has no understanding of the way the rest of the world works. And of course, that was a challenge for me. Here is a character whose background is about as different from mine as could possibly be in the modern world. I grew up in the UK and I've lived most of my life in London. And so this was for me an act of the imagination, a major act of the imagination, and I enjoyed the challenge very much. And I enjoyed thinking about things in the sophisticated world that she wouldn't get. There's a moment when Abdul says to her, "We need to get you some European style clothes. We've got to go shopping."
Yes.
And she thinks, what does that mean, going shopping? She has never been shopping. She's bought things. She never bought clothes, but she's bought fabric to buy clothes, to make clothes. And the notion of going around shops looking for something to spend your money on is so alien to her that she can't quite grasp it. Now, that's the kind of thing that's a real challenge. And I enjoyed that very much. So I enjoyed writing her. But of course, Tamara is the brave and smart and very sexy girl. Frankly, just the kind of girl that I would have fallen in love with when I was 30.
And she was no pushover. I mean, she was a strong girl,
Absolutely,
from the very beginning.
Yes, and when I was 30, she would probably have looked at me and said, "I'm not interested in him."
Well, I don't know. I don't know, Ken.
Well,
I like Tamara a great deal. I like Keir's strength, and she knew the difference between right and wrong, and
yes.
She wasn't afraid of challenging. And you're quite right about the clothes, but that was an early discussion between her and Tamara when Tamara went to Lake Chad and into this village, and they were looking for terrorists, which they didn't find there. But that was interesting. And the male characters, Abdul is a fascinating character. He's kind of James Bondy, don't you think?
Well, he's quite a tough guy.
Yes.
And I sort of, part of him, one of the things about Abdul is that in parts of the story, he really needs to be a tough guy. And I thought, well, where would he have learned to be a tough guy? He can be tall and strong, but where would he have learned to fight? And while I was writing this, I happened to meet and get to know. Now, you're not going to believe this, but this guy was an estate agent, okay, a real estate agent. Now, real estate agents in this country, anyway, are not normally tough guys. But this guy, after I'd known him for a while, he asked me to make a contribution. He was, as a fundraiser, he was doing a mixed martial arts fight. And basically what that means is a fight with no rules.
Oh.
And they call it mixed martial arts because you can kick and punch and anything you like. And when the other guy is down, you can carry on punching him. So these fights are very, very popular and they're horrible. They're so dangerous. And this guy, who was an estate agent and a very, very good estate agent, this is what he was doing to raise funds for charity. He was going in for one of these fights. So I thought, that's it. That's how Abdul learned to fight really nasty fights. He went in for this mixed martial arts sport, which is tremendously popular. Amazingly, you wouldn't get me anywhere near it for $1 million. Never mind $1 million, $100 million I wouldn't do it for. And so I sort of, that aspect of Abdul, I got from this real estate agent that I got to know. And I thought that, that can explain why there's not very much violence in this book, but just occasionally He needs to do something really tough. And that's his background. That's where he got it from. So, and in other respects, Abdul is absolutely not based on the real estate guy that I met. But that's what I do. I pick bits of people and use them. And actually, my kids sometimes say, aha, I know who does that. It'll be somebody who does something with his hair or something like that. They say, I know who does that. And I never use a whole real person as a model, but I pinch bits of them.
So let's just talk about the ratcheting up of tension, because that is one of the things, you know, I mean, if you were to take this book to the beach, I don't think anybody can take this book to the beach. It's too damn heavy. So you've got to read it, you know, when you're having sundowners and all sorts of things, or climbing a mountain or something like that. But I mean, it is riveting. And the tension creeps up really slowly, because you're using at least 5 different characters, and you know that they're going to be pulled together, even though you don't have the faintest idea of how that's happening. But you're looking at the world, the real world around us, and you know it's not a healthy place at the moment. And that must have been in the back of your head as well, Ken. I mean, it's a very uncomfortable world that we're living in at the moment.
And I suppose that was part of what drove me to write a book about the danger of World War III. My feeling that the human race is in danger in all sorts of ways that are new and quite frightening. We've lived with the threat of nuclear war all my life. I was born in 1949. But first of all, Russia was not as threatening as China is now. Secondly, there are more nuclear weapons in the world now than there ever were. Thirdly, there are more countries that have nuclear weapons. So the danger of nuclear war is greater now than it ever was. Plus, there are also 2 other major dangers. We could all be wiped out by climate change, and we could all be wiped out by a virus. So I think there's a feeling amongst people that the world isn't a safe place anymore, and that's very unnerving. And so that may be part of what drove me to write a novel about the danger of a terrible war.
So do you think that people would be sufficiently intrigued to buy this book simply because it is talking about extinction? You know, I mean, ultimately, that, I mean, once somebody lets off a nuclear weapon, somebody else has got to retaliate at some stage, don't they?
Yeah.
So
but really,
ultimately, that's what you're leading up to.
Yes, that's true. But really, I want people to buy this book because it's a really good story. I mean, it's, you know, the danger that I outline is very real, I think. But my job is not really to warn people of danger. My job is to enchant people and draw them into my story so that they get completely fascinated by it. And, you know, when the plane lands, they're really disappointed because they've got to close the book. That's what I'm really trying to do. I'm really trying to create a great story. And although I think this book raises interesting questions, and I'm pleased if people discuss those questions, that's not my main purpose. My main purpose is to get you, well, you know, you in bed this morning reading the last 4 chapters again and finding them fascinating. That's great. That's music to my ears.
Yes, and of course, you know, when you're reading 800 pages and you don't have too much time, I mean, I read quite thoroughly, but you read at such a pace, and you discover all sorts of things when you go back, when there's certain periods that you want to go back to, which I do actually. And I was also really interested in the figures that you were quoting the time. I mean, for instance, for every Chinese nuclear weapon missile, America has got at least 6. So they just outnumber China.
Yes.
I mean, are those figures, I presume, are quite accurate?
Yes, they are. They are as accurate as they can possibly be. I consulted, you know, the experts on Chinese government, Chinese military, Chinese army, Chinese weaponry, There are people who spend their lives studying these things, and some of those people were my consultants for this book. And if anybody knows, they do. And so, to the very best of not just my knowledge, but the very best of anybody's knowledge outside China, those figures were right. The figures for the American nuclear weapons also. And you're absolutely right. It's the Americans have a huge preponderance of nuclear weapons over China. And you may say, in that case, how could there ever possibly be a war? And to get the answer to that, of course, you have to read the book.
Yes, of course you do. But there is one moment, and neither you nor I are giving much away at all. But there is a moment when the President of the United States, and she is under 5 feet tall. Why? Why did you make her so small, by the way?
Do you know, it just seemed I wanted to make her very distinctive, and the way that she feels about her height is characteristic of her, in that she says, well, one of my predecessors as president was very short and he beat a guy who was nearly a foot taller than him, so I can do the same. So it kind of underlines her feistiness.
So there she is, and I mean, all is not well around the world, and America is there and looking at things and is concerned. And of course, we've ratcheted up from Defcon 5 to 4 to 3 to 2. Now 2 is really, really serious, and she decides she better know how to, press a button. And this whole thing of snapping a code or just explain that, because I could hear the snap this morning when I was reading it, and I thought, I need another coffee before I go on. Tell us about that. I mean, it's really tense, really, Ken.
Well, the American president, of course, has the power to start a nuclear war. And the way she does that is by calling the Pentagon war room and telling them to launch the missiles. But when she does that, she's got to prove that she's the president. How does she do that? So the president, all presidents of the United States, carry with them at all times a little plastic container called the biscuit, because it's about the size of a cookie. And inside is a card which has a series of letters and numbers, which is the code. And that code identifies the person as the president of the United States. So in order to start a nuclear war, she has to break the plastic, take the code out, call the war room and say, this is the president. I'm ordering you to launch nuclear weapons. Here is the code. And when they hear the correct code, they will press the button and launch the nuclear weapons. And that's every president is supposed to carry that. There was one president who kept forgetting it, and it was Jimmy Carter, apparently.
Oh, lovely.
He would leave it in his other jacket and that kind of thing. That's reported on the internet. I couldn't tell you whether that's a true story, but I repeated it in Never as a possible true story. But most presidents, Pauline and most presidents, are very meticulous about it. They know this is a terribly serious business, and they have to have that with them at all times.
Yes, and you worry. You do have a Trump-like figure in the book, so we won't spoil anything. I'd like you to read a little bit. Won't you read an extract from the book? I know that you've chosen something that doesn't have guns in it, but
no. Well, this is a romantic moment. You mentioned Tamara, and I did too, as a character that I particularly liked, and I think you like this character. And during the course of Never, she has a romance with, and she's a spy, as you mentioned. She's a CIA agent in Chad, in North Africa, and she works with her opposite number in the French Secret Service, and his name is Tab, and they work together. And at this stage in the story, they're still working together, but she's gorgeous and he is terribly romantic in a rather French way. And so they have dinner together. And then the question is, what's going to happen? They're both about 30. The question is, what's going to happen after dinner? So I'll read you the short section which tells us what happens after dinner. Dinner was over, but it was too early to go home. She surprised herself by saying, "Do you want to dance?" There was a club in the basement of the hotel. It was staid by comparison with clubs in Chicago or even Boston, but it was the hottest spot in N'Djamena. Tab said, "Sure. I'm a terrible dancer, but I love it." Terrible? How? I don't know. I've been told I look silly. It was hard to imagine this poised and elegant man doing something silly. Tamara looked forward to seeing it. Tab called for the bill and they split it. They went down in the elevator. Before the doors opened, they heard the seismic thud of bass and drums, a sound that always gave Tamara itchy feet. The club was packed with affluent young Chadians in skimpy clothing. The girls' short skirts made Tamara's outfit look middle-aged. Tamara led Tab straight to the dance floor, moving to the beat even before they got there. Tab was an enchantingly bad dancer. His arms and legs flailed to no particular rhythm, but he clearly enjoyed it. Tamara liked dancing with him. The casually sexy atmosphere of a club put her in a mildly romantic mood. After an hour, they got cokes and took a break. Reclining on a couch in the chill-out room, Tab said, "Have you ever tried mar?" "Is that a drug?" "It's a brandy made from the skins of grapes after the juice has been squeezed out. It started as a cheap alternative to cognac, but it's become a refined tipple in its own right. You can even get mar de champagne." "Let me guess," she said, "you've got a bottle at home. You're telepathic." All women are telepathic. "So you know that I want to take you home for a nightcap." She was flattered. He had already decided that this was more than a professional relationship. But she had not. "No, thank you," she said. "I've had a great time, but I don't want to stay up late." "Okay." They went out. She felt a bit down and wished she had not refused his offer of a nightcap. He asked the doorman to fetch his car and offered her a lift. She declined and phoned the car service. While they were waiting, he said, "I enjoyed talking to you so much. Could we have dinner again, with or without mar de champagne afterwards?" "Okay," she said. "We could go somewhere more laid back next time, a Chadian restaurant, perhaps." "Nice idea. Call me." "Okay." Her car came and he held the door for her. She pecked his cheek. "Good night." "Sleep well." The car took her to the embassy and she went to her room. So they didn't spend the night together, but watch this space.
Yes, I'm going to say watch this space and all the other spaces. I think it's an absolutely terrific read. Let's see if we've got any questions, because that might be quite fun. I think
Yes.
we've got one here from Barbara. Ken, do you want to answer this one? "I find that an author begins a book very well and takes you into the story with great gusto, but the end of the book ends up as a wet fish. Ooh. How do you manage to keep your readers engrossed to the end?"
Oh, well, first of all, Barbara, I totally agree with you. And it happens to me many times reading a book. It starts really well and then it gets a bit soggy. And I think wet fish is a very good description of a disappointing ending to what seemed to be a great novel. And it's something that I work very hard to avoid. I'm very conscious of this. You set something up and then you sort of lose the urgency. And it's something that I have to avoid, and all authors try to avoid it. But you have to. This is partly why I write an outline, because when I'm writing the outline, I can see where it's going soggy. And, chapter 10, I'm outlining chapter 10, not writing it. I'm outlining it and saying what happens. And I look at it and I think, this is not good enough. This is not exciting. It's just one thing after another. I've got to change this. And for me, it's a great thing to write an outline, because I spot that sogginess, that wet fish ending. I can see it in advance, and I never even begin to write that. I don't begin to write the story until I know that the middle and the end are going to be as exciting as the beginning. That's the way I try to get over that problem. But I think, Barbara, you've put your finger on something very important. And for anybody who wants to write a novel, it's really good to be aware of that danger and make sure that it doesn't happen to you.
So, I mean, I was just thinking how important your first paragraph is, your sentence or the first paragraph, also incredibly important.
Well, you certainly want it. You certainly want, because quite a lot of time in the bookshop, people look at the cover, they think, oh, that's interesting. Then they may look at the blurb on the flap, and then quite often they turn to page 1. So your page 1 has got to be something that makes them want to read on. I think about that a lot. And actually, I think my best first line is actually the first line of The Pillars of the Earth, which is, the small boys came early to the hanging. And I wrote that because I wanted to tell the reader this story is going to be quite cruel in places, because it's about a society where they have public hangings and small boys really like the hangings. That tells you that there's something sort of fundamentally, viscerally violent about this society, as there was about the Middle Ages. And of course, what the story is about how people rise above this. But that first line was meant to give you that message and also to intrigue you. And that's the main thing. The first line should make you want to read on.
Ken, what are you writing next? That comes from Adrian Brisson, I think it is. Yeah.
Well, Adrian, I am writing another novel because I finished Never about 9 months ago, and I never stop. I don't want to stop. I don't feel the need of a rest. I love writing stories. So I've been writing another novel for 9 months, but I'm going to disappoint you, Adrian. I'm sorry. I don't feel ready to talk about it yet. One of those reasons is that I might change it completely. And I did once actually work on a book for a year and then throw it away. So that could happen with the idea I'm working on at the moment. So I don't want to talk it up. I thank you for your question and I thank you for your interest, and I'm sorry not to give you a better answer.
Well, the same person, Adrian, thank you for this. There is another Kingsbridge book on the way. I hope so. Well, have you heard about The Evening and the Morning, Adrian, which is a prequel to Kingsbridge? And at the end of my interview with Ken, with the prequel to Kingsbridge, I said, well, I know that you're writing something. Just give us a hint. And this is the book that he was already writing, and that you were well. I mean, you were quite coy about it, actually. I mean, I knew you weren't going to tell me, but I felt, I had to ask you. And but you must have been quite close to the end of this, if not already finished.
Well, no, but we talked, I think, in September last year, and I had about 6 months to go. So certainly the shape of the novel was in my head very much by then. But there's also a slight feeling that if you start telling people about something, your energy goes into telling them instead of writing it. And that's something that I have a slight fear of.
I don't think you should tell anybody, but you could certainly say, it might surprise you, but yes, I've written about
that kind of thing. And
something like that.
And let me tell Adrian, I'm pretty sure that sooner or later there will be another Kingsbridge novel. I love writing them. I love that town. It's come to stand. It's not even about the Middle Ages anymore. It's come to stand for England. Kingsbridge, things that happen in England happen in Kingsbridge in my novels. And so there's almost certain to be another one.
Okay. Well, I mean, you've done a prequel. You can't do a prequel to the prequel.
Well, yes, I can.
You can do what you like. I mean, The thing is, people are going to queue up for it. Let's see. Any more questions? Let's see. We've got a couple here. There aren't any more questions at this point. So I think that we are almost at the end of this conversation, because what we cannot do with this is we can't let you into any of the secrets. And there are secrets galore right from the beginning. There are clues right from the very beginning. And it is a right old thriller, but it's more than that. It's kind of us. It's right now. It's contemporary. And it is scary. It is absolutely scary. And so much happens by chance. Because I kept saying, Ken, what the hell has Lake Chad and a pretty little widow with a little boy living in poverty on the shores of Lake Chad, how do they fit in with this? But there was already a couple of clues there, but you had to read further in order to see it. And as soon as China came into it, and the very engaging character that you were talking about earlier on, a bright contemporary Chinese guy trying very hard to, well, not to manipulate, but to try and interpret what was going on and to do his job really well. I was going to say something that would give something away, so I can't finish the sentence. But I think it is really, really tense and very, very clever. And I can't see anybody in the bookshelves or listening to this in the bookshops who is going to be disappointed by this, because I'm quite cynical, and I loved every single minute of it. It was wonderful. And Ken, it's just developing this story and pulling them all together, and then suddenly you work something out and you can see the end of it. It's wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much to both of you and Jenny and Ken for a fantastic discussion. I'm sure we could just continue and listen to more and more of it, but of course we have to get through the whole book first. It only just released in South Africa, and it will make a fantastic Christmas read. But thank you so much for your time. And Ken, has it released in many different languages sort of from the start?
Yes, that's right. In most languages, it came out on either the 9th or the 11th of November. That's right.
Sure, that's very exciting. Now, I've seen some other language covers and just thought maybe as many as 33, like your other books, but it's nice that it's available throughout the world and not only delayed as it's often the case with translations. But congratulations on the book, and thanks so much, Jenny, for your time. And this is the last virtual event from the FLF this year, and it's definitely been a highlight. And for all of you out there, if you're not a member of the FLF yet, please join us and have a look on our website if you'd like to join, or join our mailing list as we prepare for the physical in-person festival next year in May. Thank you very much. You all have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Good night.
Thank you, Ken.